Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cinematic Schematic, the official podcast of the Cinematropolis.com, your home to thoughtful conversations on film. I'm your host, Caleb Masters, and today we are going to be exploring the secret life of one Formula One racer, Michael Fassbender. That's right. Today, we're reviewing David Fincher's The Killer. We're going to start with a few little important newsworthy items before jumping into an icebreaker question where we rank our top 3 David Fincher films, and then we'll jump into a spoiler-free review of The Killer and provide a verdict before we jump into an in-depth spoiler section. Rejoining me today in the killings, because there's a lot of killings happening this fall in movies, I guess killings in movies, there's in titles of movies specifically, is my co-host and award-winning Oklahoma filmmaker, LaRon Chapman. LaRon, welcome back to the killings.
It is early. Thanks for having me. I have my coffee. I'm ready to tackle this new Fincher film.
You know, there's also Thanksgiving, which I believe was originally titled Thanksgilling based on that movie trailer. So again, more killing.
Yeah.
I'm very thankful.
It's a bloody holiday season.
Also rejoining us, he's the co-host of the GoodTrash Genre Cast and GoodTrash Media co-founder. And also, when I met him, was one of the biggest David Fincher heads that I know.
That's true.
I think that's still true, but we're going to find out today. Dalton Stuart. Dalton, welcome back to the show.
Happy to be here, Caleb. Always a pleasure.
Well, you know, nihilism. Let's go, right?
Maybe not this time.
Ooh.
We'll see.
We'll see. I love it. And last but certainly not least, very excited to be rejoined by the deadCenter Shorts programmer and also the host of OKC's Frightful Film, and rejoining us from the Barbie podcast, Burris. Paris, welcome back to the show.
Hello, I'm excited to talk about movies.
Yes, movies are great. Before we get into today's review conversation, I wanted to quickly note, listeners, that if you are listening to the show and you enjoy the conversation, you can please support us by subscribing and leaving us a rating and review on your preferred podcast app. Seriously, it would really help us go a long way. You know, I'd rather not have to put people on kill lists. And am I threatening listeners now? Oh, that's dangerous. Leave us a rating and a review, please. That'll be very helpful. Hey, let's jump into some very important news items. Hey, guys, a week ago, strikes are over. Hollywood, we are back. Films are back up in production. Immediately.
I told Craig, I was like, man, I got McDonald's money now. We can eat again.
Oh, my God. So according to The Hollywood Reporter, after 118 days, the Hollywood actors' strike has officially concluded. And according to Hollywood Reporter, now we have a better idea of what the members of the SAG-AFTRA have won in the union's new minimum contract agreement. So admittedly, listeners have only read the bullet points. So I'm going to give you the highlights as I understand them. So to account for the inflation, SAG-AFTRA originally demanded an 11% general wage increase for the first year of the contract in July. And then the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers countered with a maximum offer of 5%. They settled on 7%, effective immediately, with future increases in 2024 and 2025. And they're saying the total package includes more than $1 billion in new wages and benefit plan funding. I don't know the ins and outs of it. I know a lot of this had to do with the pension and retirements as well, was a big selling point. They also included a lot of the key concessions related to AI. So SAG-AFTRA also secured what's called consent and compensation guardrails on the use of AI. So under the new contracts rules, a studio must obtain an actor's informed consent before creating or using a digital replica of a performer, whether they're an A-list star or a background actor. Very important for the latter. Crabtree Ireland, who is with the Screen Actors Guild, told the SAG-AFTRA told reporters that AI was one of the most divisive issues in the negotiating room, particularly with regards to generative AI or the creation of an entirely synthetic performer. And then lastly, again, so much more to dive into. As for streaming residuals, the AMPTP had essentially rejected all of the original proposals from SAG-AFTRA in the initial negotiations, but the new contract establishes a streaming participation bonus for the first time, compensating performers in addition to traditional residuals. Other wins include improved relocation benefits, regulations on self-taped auditions, and increased residuals for stunt performers. That's a lot of stuff we threw at you. There's frankly way more to it than I was able to just put out there right now, and I haven't read enough, but I just wanted to acknowledge that, hey, the actors seem like they got at least things, guardrails in place or concessions they needed to have future battles with this strike. So congratulations to SAG-AFTRA for reaching a deal, finally.
Yeah.
Let's just go around the table. LaRon, you're talking about your McDonald's money. You are a filmmaker. So, I mean, what does this mean for you? What is your take on this?
It means that gigs will be coming back. I'm exclusively gig based in terms of finance. I mean, in terms of paying for bills and eating, So it's nice to know that work will be opening back up here. I was hoping that we would get through the holiday season, you know what I mean, with this news. So this is great that it's happening before Thanksgiving. So even if I don't get something in the next 2 months, I am hopeful that next year will be fine, And so that's nice. But also, just the main thing that I take away from that is the consent of the AI thing. I think is the most important thing, because I don't think a lot of actors care as much about them taking their likeness as the fact that they don't have a say in that. That's the part that I think is really necessary.
Yeah, which again, for listeners who might not be familiar, there especially companies like Netflix and Disney had in their contracts for digital scans that they could use in perpetuity without consent, which is just crazy.
Just kind of crazy and very violating in a way. I mean, have any of you been inundated with like those ads for like, are you missing out on a 6,400 subsidy, whatever from the government, and it's like The Rock and Oprah are saying it, and then it's like President Biden saying it, and it's like, but it's clearly their voices are. I mean, it's their voice, but it's not their voice. Right. You know what I mean? Like, it's a scam, but it's like how many people are clicking on it because of the stock footage they're playing of them in different settings. Like that's a scary precedent that whole AI thing I think is setting is not being able to trust what you're seeing or hearing.
Well, and I don't know how it resulted, but I know Tom Hanks said there was apparently some sort of ad that was floating around with him for like some sort of dental insurance or something like that. I don't know how that ended up, but he was basically had to make a post. If you see this, I did not say this. I did not consent to this. That's the kind of scary AI future we're heading into when it comes to the likeness of actors. So, and again, Laurent, you hit on something very important here. You are not a member of SAG-AFTRA. However,
but I work on films that are, and so if they aren't working, I'm not working. So which just shows you that it's a community that comes together, a village that comes together to make a film. So if one part of that village is not available, then none of us get to work, and so by default, I was on strike as well. Right? If that makes sense. So, but it's really exciting that they've gotten essentially the core things that they want, or at least a good stepping stone, and that I'll be working soon again.
Paris, what's your take on the result of the conclusion of the strikes?
Yeah, I feel really hopeful, and I share the same sentiment of thank goodness this isn't going into the next year. I think it's everything I've seen about it, though, it keeps saying tentative, and that concerns me a little bit because what does that mean? Tentative, right? Like, I mean, I'm going to be happy when I hear that it's like official. So I guess I'm still a little worried that tentative could go the wrong way, but let's just hope that it keeps going in the direction it's going. So
that's a good point. Again, strike is over, but the membership has not actually voted to ratify that. All the members have not voted. I think it's just the officers have agreed to a tentative deal, and thus the strikes have stopped. But theoretically, if things fall through, we could be back at this next week. That's a good point.
That's true.
Yeah. Dalton?
Labor, hey, we love it. The streaming thing, you definitely you would like to have seen more news about just straight up residuals on streamers and not just like bonus for big premieres or whatever, because that's just such a huge part of where the acting economy is going, right? I mean, you used to be able to make your bones off of a bit part, not even a featured player on a sitcom, but if you had a half a season arc or whatever, you were made for a couple of years, easy, and that's just not really in the conversation of how the industry works right now. With the pivot to streaming, so I'm with everybody. Like, great news, but you always want more, and as you kind of alluded to, Caleb, like there is, especially right before we sat down, we were talking about this. There's the hope that this sets the precedent for future negotiations, and definitely, like, now that the foot's in the door with, they've started a conversation about streaming residuals and streaming bonuses. So hopefully that just continues to pivot, and the money starts flowing the direction of the people making the product and not just towards the people financing it.
100%. Yeah. Again, listeners, I think it was our Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, which is now just Dead Reckoning, no longer Part 1, review, where we did a breakdown of, I just think it's worth noting that the people who are the studios, the top brass that the studios make oogles of money.
Yeah.
Like insane amounts of money.
Don't feel bad for them.
Right. Don't feel bad for them.
They're fine.
Like $1 billion is great, but again, and that's if you put that across like 5 or 6 CEOs, that's really not, you know what I mean? It's really a drop in the bucket. So there is still more progress that can be made.
Sure.
But the sentiment I'm seeing from a lot of actors and to a lesser degree writers is we're just glad to be back to work.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
So
I'd like to go the route of like Zendaya. I don't know if you've noticed kind of the things she does. She likes to sign on as executive producer on a lot of projects so that she can implement a 1% stake for everyone in the film. And I think that's such a, like, she did this on Malcolm and Marie that she did on Netflix, and awesome. I thought that was great because it's a way to funnel, like, basically if the movie succeeds, we all have a 1% stake in the profit. And so if you're like me and you get paid a certain hourly wage on a film, and then you get this bonus of, I don't know, $100,000 because it made 28 million, say, that's significant for your kind of, and if that was implemented in 1% of the profit is not a lot, it's a very small piece of the pie. You could actually argue for 5, you know what I mean? Like, but I would take anything other than, it's just nice to see that they're kind of seeing, like, when you have a certain amount of power in that realm, there's certain things you can do. And I'd like that to be the future of filmmaking, where, again, money's funneling to the people crafting the material and not just people who showed up the money. So
absolutely. I think that's I did not know about that. That's a really great workaround. Again, if you're going to eliminate residuals, you have to come up with new ways to funnel the money down again to the performers. So, stay tuned, listeners. We'll have more information as the conclusion of the strikes hopeful conclusion of the strikes develop. With that said, I have to follow up on our last episode, Killers of the Flower Moon. You probably noticed it was almost 3 hours long. That's a really long podcast. I think we had a lot of...
It was actually longer than that, but you did a really good job.
I got it edited down under 3 hours. Yes, correct. There was a lot of things to talk about with that movie. I feel like it was very justified. And also, as of, things were going, sometimes when you realize you're 2 hours in, you haven't even gotten to spoilers yet, you gotta kill your darlings. So we did not get to talk about the film award season prospects of Killers of the Flower Moon, which, frankly, given that conversation, I think was appropriate. I think it would have felt weird if we were talking about it in the context that we were holding on that show. So I wanted to take this time to kick off our expectations for this year's prospects for the Golden Statues, the Oscars or the Golden Globes ? Any of the awards, the SAG, all the award season. It doesn't have to be Oscars. But really quick before we do that, because I think we're gonna start by talking about Killers of the Flower Moon. Paris and Dalton, very quickly, again, we'll keep it brief, but what were your overall thoughts on Killers of the Flower Moon, and what sort of awards season potential do you think it might have? Paris, I'll start with you.
The movie, I was a little middle of the road on it, a little lukewarm overall, for many reasons, but I will say that Lily Gladstone, man, she needs an Oscar for that performance. It blew me away, and it's amazing. To me, that's definitely the standout, and that's what I've overall heard from most people who've seen it. I think it's a general consensus that we all kind of see the Oscars potential there. So hopefully she'll get a nom. Hopefully she'll win it. I'm gonna be very upset if she doesn't at least get nominated. Because come on,
for real.
People will riot. We'll
start the riot on this podcast.
Right, I'll be right there with them. So, I'm hopeful she'll get a nomination. I'm a little less convinced that she'll actually win it just based on the history of the Oscars and everything. But yeah, I'm glad to see her getting the recognition she deserves, for sure.
It's amazing. I love that she's pushing for it. If I read correctly, and you guys can correct me if I'm misunderstanding this, she will be the first Indigenous American to be nominated for Best Lead Actress if she gets nominated. There have been other Indigenous people from other countries who have been nominated previously, but not in America. So
that's an important distinction.
Yeah. So it would be her getting nominated would be historic regardless. We'll see how the other contenders play out, but she's definitely got my personal vote. Sure. Though LaRon and I have some more.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Because I think it's Taika Waititi, who has been nominated before, maybe, and some people of that vein. But I don't think any indigenous person from North America, at
Right.
least, has ever actually won an award. Wes Studi was given an honorary Oscar,
Right.
but I just think that's important for us to know, like, the only Oscar won by a Native American is an honorary,
Right.
kind of retroactive, and so it would be a big deal if she were to actually get it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, fingers crossed. We're in her camp. Dalton, what was your quick overall thoughts on Killers, and what's the awards prospects from your perspective?
Me gusta. Good movie. Yeah, that's a hell of a picture. That's for me, it's up there with anything else in like 21st Century Marty's run. There's a version of it that's probably more interesting as like a miniseries. As much as I hate to be the fucking executive, the streaming executive in the 21st century saying, but what if it was a 10-hour miniseries? But yeah, there's just a lot of story there, and it definitely makes you wonder like what had to be left on the page and could make it to the screen. But I like it a lot. It could be an interesting victory lap for Marty. We could see some of that love going on. I'm with everybody at the table, would love to see Lily get the nom. That'll be an interesting race, especially with all the stuff they got pulled or moved, challengers especially. Just all the things that it's not competing against now. It definitely seems like the race has kind of been cleared out in front, in a good way, So, but I'm with everybody else. I'm skeptical that the Academy will ever do anything good. They do occasionally, and that's always nice.
It feels like an accident when it happens, though.
Yeah, it's nice to be surprised though. But I'm very curious what award season holds for us this year. I'm always skeptically looking at it and going, interesting. I have fun with it just because it's as close as this world that we're also interested in gets to a spectator sport. Right. Other than following the box office numbers, it's award season that gives us something to hoot and holler and argue about in a lot of ways. So yeah, it should be fun no matter what.
Yeah, I think so. It also just brings, it's mainstream popularity has certainly declined tremendously over the last 2 decades, but in terms of like cinephiles, it's like we all get like hyped and pumped and get together and talk
even the
about
people
it.
who are adamant that they don't care about awards like still have something to say about the nominations usually. So it's like even if you don't care, you clearly have something resembling an opinion about it, which is it's hard not to because they kind of inundate you with the stuff once the races get going.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Laurent?
Yeah, I think for me, I think like I can see Killers kind of breaking in anywhere from 10 to 11 nominations. And I say that like picture, director, adapted screenplay, actress, actor, cinematography, costume. There's just so many like that on the craft department that we see here. I don't see it winning a lot of those awards. It's one of those things I think it's going to be adorned with nominations and then it might, unfortunately come up pretty light in terms of actual statues. And I say that because of all of the other movies that are in these particular categories, like, things like production design, like how do you compare, this and Barbie and even Poor Things, which we saw recently, like it's a competitive year in the crafts department this year, even without Dune here. You know what I mean? Like, so
even Oppenheimer is showing up with costuming and cinematography. Yeah.
But one thing I do think is interesting that I haven't considered until recently is that this year will be the first year that they actually implement the diversity requirements for, like in terms of, like what is the ratio of the people of color or, women, all minorities, that were in front of and behind the camera in various tiers. And that actually is which doesn't fare well for films that are like the presumptive, like front runner Oppenheimer.
Right.
Mostly
white males. Yeah.
Pretty white film. And now I don't know this information's been out there for a while. So they had the opportunity to like stack, minorities in the, behind the scenes, like the craft departments. But if they didn't do so, like then that's all they have, like basically. So there's a universe where something like Oppenheimer doesn't get nominated for Best Picture because it doesn't qualify, and so that's an interesting thing to add into the mix here because we hadn't considered that before. I think it would be the kind of unrivaled front runner if it wasn't, if that wasn't the case. So again, I don't know the makeup of his crew. You know what I mean? Like how many interns did he have of people in those departments? But there were people of, of different minority groups. So that's an interesting element into all of this, which might actually fare better for something like Killers of the Flower Moon in Best Picture. So I think it actually has a better chance now in that regard, because there was a lot of that, behind the scenes in terms of including the indigenous people in the process. So, that's one thing to consider, looking into it. But
I don't know if it's a fear, but my gut is telling me that Killers of the Flower Moon could be another The Irishman, where it's nominated for a crap ton of stuff and doesn't win anything. I could be wrong. I think Lily Gladstone, I will riot if she doesn't get a nomination.
Yeah.
So good.
And there's so much love
good.
behind that,
Yeah.
even from the critics and circle. I don't see a world where that doesn't happen, but
Here's my other take is I think this movie's too bleak for the Academy. Is going to be kind of harsh. Like, I know that the Academy is all about important movies, but at the end of the day, like, you can only get so dark before they're like, I mean, that's great, but it's better at La La Land. You know what I mean? It's
right.
And we're going to talk about Poor Things in a future podcast, but you and I had a sneak peek of that, and that definitely feels like it aligns a lot more with what the Academy tends to appreciate.
I don't think you can undersell the importance of how much the Academy likes to pat themselves on the back.
Oh yeah,
And
true.
boy, will they love to say, after all the shitty westerns we gave gold statues back in the day, isn't it nice of us to give the movie about indigenous issues an Oscar? Aren't we nice? So I don't know.
Fair point.
They do that, they do love to be like, and this very historical award goes to, they really love to trot out their progress. So, which is, thumbs up in a lot of ways, obviously, but there is also like a PR element to it, right?
Definitely.
So,
a political aspect to it,
sure.
for sure. Yeah.
You mentioned Barbie. I think that is going to be a way bigger splash.
Way bigger splash than
at the
people are
Oscars.
thinking,
Yes.
which is good. I mean, I
think it's an amazing movie.
I think that's a good nomination. It's a fun film.
If it doesn't win Best Song, I mean, I don't know what the other competitors
Yeah.
are, but Best Song, I mean,
It's
come
going to
on.
win against itself.
Right?
well, and Prieto's probably, running against himself for Barbie and Killers, right? So
Because
that definitely
isn't there like 3 songs that they could theoretically nominate
for Barbie? Yeah.
There's like Dua Lipa, the Billie Eilish song, and then Ken song.
Yeah. But even, in cinematography, we're talking about the same DP,
Rodrigo Prieto.
Yeah, he did both Killers of the Flower Moon and Barbie same year. And they're both exceptional
Look
looking
good.
films.
Yeah.
I do think the one score thing, I think Killers has we'll see what the competition looks like. I do
Score.
think score for Robbie Robertson is likely.
Yeah. It's unique. Yeah.
And he passed.
Posthumous.
He passed
Yeah.
recently. Yeah. They
so
love those too. They love
love those.
they love those posthumous Oscars. Yeah.
But I don't know, LeBron. I'm very excited about the Oscar season because it does feel like last year it was we had Everything Everywhere at Once that was like the Cinderella story.
Yeah.
And it was really crazy compelling, but it almost felt by the time we got to the actual Oscars, it was a foregone conclusion that it was going to win all this stuff. Whereas this year, I'm sitting, I'm like, this could be
anybody's
anyone's
game.
game.
Do you guys feel like, I know the two of you kind of think about the awards circuit a lot. Do you feel like this year will kind of have an asterisk next to it like the 21 Oscars did, the COVID year? Because of this being the big strike year, do we feel like that's kind of going to be its reputation?
I mean,
There was a lot of award contenders that got pushed.
yeah, a lot of things did get pushed. Yeah. It'll be an interesting, I feel like I hope it's not a year like, the Green Book year. In terms of like, there's so many eclectic options because you had like Black Klansman that year. You had A Star Is Born, which is like
Literally every other nomination was better.
literally like the favorite. It was like a weird amalgamation of movies that like everyone kind of loved them individually, but there was just no clear front runners. So they went the Joe Biden route and went safe with. You know what I mean? Like everyone's like 4th or 5th. Maybe choice. I don't know.
The old super safe, so safe it's almost upsetting route.
It's almost upsetting, and who the hell cares about that movie? And who is talking about that movie?
Nobody.
Like nobody. That's a Best Picture winner. It's very sad, but yeah.
Well, so much. Paris, anything you want to add about Oscars season this year? Anything you're looking forward to, whether it be nominations or expectations or letdowns?
I'm really gunning for Barbie in like every aspect. Yeah, I mean, I think we're all probably on the same page for most things and what we expect. I don't think it's going to be a big surprise of a year. Like, honestly, I think most of us can kind of like see the front runners early on. And, I mean, it's just right around the corner anyways. Right. So it's like, what else? I'm wondering if Priscilla is like too late in the game, and I haven't seen it yet, but it is Sofia Coppola, you know, it's based on real people, which the Oscars love, things like that. So I would say maybe Priscilla is part of that conversation too. But I haven't seen it yet, and I just don't know if it's like too late in the year, because that's iffy, you know? Yeah. But yeah, so I think we're all gunning for the same things here. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, Priscilla. I do think that the campaign for that's been very quiet. But it did, to your point though, we did just get the other Elvis movie last year, right. And so Elvis is still kind of like in the zeitgeist a little bit, and this is like a very counter. I haven't seen it yet either, but I understand it's a very minimalist, quiet, exploring the dark side of Elvis and that relationship versus the one we got last year.
I think part of the issue too is that we haven't had, because of the strike, we haven't been able to what's been hard for us to kind of see what the big one is in this big race is that, you know, they haven't been able to promote these movies. You know, so we don't know. Like, if you see them like hitting the pavement, then you're like, okay, this is clearly getting a lot of attention. But now that that's opened up, they do got a little bit of time to kind of like do a last minute charge for that, you know, for that race with the next 3 months. Well,
John Wick Chapter 4 for Best Picture. Let's go.
Well, funny you bring that up. I mean, Lionsgate is running a full for your consideration campaign for it, and they are actively like, why are there not stunt awards?
Absolutely.
And that's kind of a big thing that they're pushing for in their for your consideration campaign, from what I've heard,
I love
which is
it.
cool. Yeah, I mean, I don't live in a fantasy world where my beloved John Wick picks up a production design Oscar, but
just to be nominated, you know, I know it's like another cliche. Just to be nominated would be an honor, but I mean, the work they do on those movies is really good.
Some of the sexiest lighting you've ever seen in your entire life. Come on.
The last thing I'll say is just that I'm hoping that smaller films like Past Lives or All of Us Strangers, coming out pretty soon here, those kind of movies just don't get lost in the mix, because I mean, I've at least seen Past Lives, and up until recently it was my favorite movie of the year, and so it'd be nice to see that. I mean, beyond that though, I do think we're looking at Barbie, Killers, Oppenheimer, Poor Things, Anatomy of a Fall, The Holdovers, I'm seeing it after this podcast, The Color Purple, Maestro, and possibly The Zone of Interest, you know.
And I will even say, I mean, we're getting ready to talk about The Killer, which has like some of the best sound design of any movie. Just
absolutely,
just hands down, just amazing sound design. So I would hope that would be somewhere in the nominations. You know,
Fincher's got a nod for, especially for the technical stuff. I mean, it was the same way with Mank, a movie that I didn't love as much, but like it was like just it's an impressive work. You know, oh, man, great call out, Paris. I hadn't thought about that.
And the score. Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. I mean,
and the Academy loves to nominate those scores. I mean, which for good reason. Those scores rip. You know, it's the Academy has an interesting relationship with Fincher, kind of up and down. So I'm curious how the Killer
he's
fares.
been nominated so many times, he's never won.
Yeah, they love to throw him a couple, right? And like I feel like Benjamin is like Mr. Buttons is like the first Mr. Buttons, if you're nasty. That's like the first one where they like really give the movie. You know, it doesn't end up winning a lot, but it gets a ton of nominations, and so he kind of is like a made man over there. It seems like I get what you're saying. I'm with you, Laurent. Like Past Lives, You Hurt My Feelings, Showing Up. Like there's a lot of good grown-ups and talking in rooms movies this year, and you do worry that they're just going to kind of get swept away by all these epics and these sort of more even Poor Things, which is not like quite the epic in terms of runtime that you think of with something like Killers, but that seems like a very sort of grand sweeping fantasy tale from what I've seen. So there's a lot of personality to kind of unfortunately bury these other kind of smaller movies, like you said.
The quieter movies are going to have a harder time
breaking out
there.
I'm understanding it's probably going to be too provocative, but there is American Fiction that's coming out there this year.
I keep forgetting that one.
I have a screener on my calendar for it, and I'm really excited to see it. I don't know, from what I hear, it's probably going to be too provocative for the Academy, but
where did it win? It won at a big festival.
TIFF, it got like the Audience Award, right?
Okay,
that was the big thing it got. Yeah, which is, I think that's widely considered a good prognosticator.
It was directed by Cord Jefferson, who's done some amazing work on television. It was one of the lead writers on the Watchmen series for HBO. So, anyway, very curious. A lot of good stuff. I will say, this will be an ongoing conversation for the next couple months on this podcast, but having now seen Poor Things, not to tip our hand, all I will say is it's going to get the noms.
It's going to get the noms.
Yeah.
Is it going to win? I'm not sure, but it's going to get the noms.
I'm
Like
excited.
every aspect of it feels like it's very Yorgos, and that's what I love about it. But it's just very showy in the right way with all the production.
And Emma Stone, goddamn,
I hate it.
She doesn't need a second Oscar, but damn it, she's good in it.
And she actually does some really challenging stuff. Where you're like, no, I don't want to say that you deserve this more than other people, but
Yes. I'm still gutting for Lily. But,
me too.
But it's like she's just good.
It's not like she just turned out another okay performance that people love too much. It's like no, she actually does some crazy shit in that movie.
She goes for it. I'm like, okay.
This totally isn't going to happen. But in a perfect world, Marshawn Lynch would get a Best Supporting Actor for Bottoms.
Yeah.
Oh
I
my
think
God,
he's amazing in that.
He's fantastic. Yeah.
Like, it's never going to happen, but I would give him the award.
We can dream. And this is a great segue into Fincher, because as we talk about, the Academy and how Fincher has not been awarded, I would argue that Fincher doesn't need the Academy to have made a huge impact on American culture. I think I'm thinking back about how he did not win, The Social Network didn't win Best Picture, and I don't think anyone here's can anyone else tell me what won that year?
The King's Speech.
The King's Speech, but
I can't tell you. We can only tell you that
sorry,
because
we should have teed that up a little.
Yeah,
but
our brains are broken. Of course, we can tell you what won that year.
we've had our coffee, but no, but who's talking about it is the question.
Oh,
It's like,
exactly.
Like
And also, just one, because I don't want it to get forgotten, is Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. It has potential. Rachel McAdams.
Sure.
I didn't personally love that movie, but I do think that it has some potential acting noms there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I agree.
Yeah, I
I'd
wanted
love
to
to
throw
see
that
a
in there because
Rachel
that was a big
McAdams
one.
one.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had a crush on Rachel McAdams basically my whole life. So yeah,
You too?
Yeah.
Who hasn't?
Bring it back to we remember that the King's Speech won because this is this podcast. But I'm just saying, like,
Yes.
no one, and I liked the King's Speech. By
I
the
did
way.
too,
But
but
like that movie, I just think when you watch Social Network at the time, you're like, this is a movie that's really got its fingers on the pulse. It's pretty important. I think maybe it should win. And how many was 13 years later? I watched it again last year, and I was like, "Holy shit! This movie really had the fingers on the pulse, and that it understood where we as a culture were going in a really, really profound way." And that's not even to mention, I mean, Fight Club, Seven, all the movies. So, with that said, let's break the ice, baby, and rank our top 3 David Fincher films. And I'm going to start with the man to my left, Dalton Stuart. What are your top 3 films directed by the Finch man?
Number 1 with the bullet, Zodiac, a totemic American masterpiece about our fucked up little brains and our obsession with violence and human nastiness. What a picture. Love that movie. Number 2, Gone Girl. Sort of this lurid, trashy, pulpy thriller that's hiding this sort of deeper treatise on relationships between men and women and the white American middle class. Wild movie. And just like maybe the best use of Ben Affleck ever. And a Rosamund Pike that is so good that it's convinced Hollywood all she can do is Ice Queen, even though she's like so good at everything. Lastly, I want to give it to something else, but for me it's Fight Club. What am I going to do? Not credit one of the movies between this and Batman Forever? It's like the 2 movies that are responsible for my sexuality. So I got to give it up for Fight Club. But, if you don't get that Tyler's the bad guy and that Edward Norton's the real Tyler, like, I don't know what to like. That the fucking sad eyes sunken in the back of his head guy. That's what Tyler really looks like, you weirdos. I don't know. I can't help you if you don't understand that movie. But I think it's so funny. And it feels kind of tired in its Gen X criticisms now because it all feels so obvious
In retrospect.
Yeah. But at the same time, I think there's so much. It's so funny and such a kind of synthesis of like all the things that Fincher is good at. I think it's easy to be drawn to his nihilism when you're younger, and for me, that's what I used to respond to. But the older that I get, the more interested I am in his humor. and sort of the hidden sincerity that I think is like running through a lot of these movies. So yeah, that's the top 3 for me.
Great choices. Love all 3 of those. Paris, Burris, what are your top 3 David Fincher movies?
My top 3, at number 1, I have to put Gone Girl. I mean, it's just one of my favorite movies of all time, period. Even beyond being a David Fincher. Like, it's just a really big movie for me. I mean, it's one of those movies that I've shown so many people, like, you haven't seen Gone Girl? You have to watch it immediately.
Yes.
And just, like, I love that, like, I mean, 2 of the ones in my top 3 are the few Finchers that have a woman as the lead. I love Amy Dunn's character. I love Rosamund Pike's portrayal of her. I love Gillian Flynn's book, Gone Girl. I love that she wrote the screenplay. She's one of my favorite writers. I mean, it's just a 10 out of 10 on all regards. And Ben Affleck. I hate Ben Affleck. So for this movie to make me feel like no other person could have played that role as good as him, I mean, that is amazing, because I really just cannot stand him in anything else. So it's just, yeah. At number 2 though is Zodiac, which I think is another 10 out of 10. But really the reason, because I feel like there are like 5 or 6 movies of Fincher's that you could put in the top 3, and I'd be like, yeah, absolutely. Some of the greatest movies of all time. Like, you know, easy. But for this one to be a close second, it's because it's one of the scariest movies I've ever seen. It has the scariest scene I've ever seen. And no spoilers or anything, but like, you know, it's one of the gruesome scenes, one of many in the movie, and I've never been so scared watching a movie in my life.
Like,
Does it happen in the park?
Berryessa murder?
There's some stabbing.
Yeah.
Yes.
In a very public place.
Because everyone talks about the basement scene, which I think is a phenomenal scene, but for me, that scene was the most scared I've ever been watching a scene. I would say the most scary movie I've ever seen, for me personally, is Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Okay.
But like, that is the scene that I think scares me, like, of anything I've seen.
It's so real and raw.
Yeah. It's just so well done, and just, yeah. So that's why it gets my number 2. And then at 3, the girl with the dragon tattoo, because I mean, I'm wearing a fuck you fucking fuck shirt right now. Like, I was kind of late to that movie. I didn't see it when it came out because I was a little iffy about it. I just wasn't sure the subject matter, if I would like it. But then later when I watched it, I fell in love with it. I rewatched it recently. I think Rooney Mara as Elizabeth Sander is amazing. It's just, yeah, it's got the goods. It's got the goods.
Got the best goods. Yeah. Oh man. And one day I dream we'll still get a sequel to that movie from that director with Rooney Mara. It's not too late. LaRon Chapman, what are your top 3 picks for David Fincher?
So my number 1 pick, I go back and forth on this, but I think as of lately, the one that spoke to me the most is The Social Network. I feel like, because this is also Fincher, like not leaning into the ultra violence that's there. This is just dealing with the psychology of this machine, and you know, as we're going to talk about later in the podcast, his idea of talking about process and you know, it feels very rooted, you know, for a character like this, and to make this character, this real life character that we all know. I mean, no, not personally, but you know, that we've lived through, because we were here before Facebook was a thing, and make him this figure, this big, like, larger than life figure in the same way. And it's just, it speaks so much to the culture, and so much to, you know, how he revolutionized the way that we communicate with each other. And then he was also not very great at communicating himself. And it's just interesting how, you know what I mean, how he changed how we speak to each other, but we also are missing something because of this thing that exists now, you know, because it keeps us at a distance. It lets us, you know, it gives us that anonymity, you know, lets us say those things that we wouldn't say out loud in person, you know. But yeah, then my second film, Seven, is a big one for me. That's like a dad movie that I grew up with. That's something we bonded over. So, and I've never been more shocked by an ending, you know, at that age, you know.
Right.
And then Gone Girl is a solid third choice for me. That's one of those ones where I didn't read the book. I retroactively read the book, and I still love the book, but I just felt like, wow, this movie really gets it. Like, it gets that same moment in the book that you go, what the fuck? Like, it is the same moment in the movie, and they do such a good job at, like, not showing their hand too early. You're invested enough because you have a kind of a unreliable narrator or narrators, and it's just again another slick, very elegantly made film. So
yeah, man, I think Paris said it well. You could put basically any of his movies in the top 3, and you'd be like, yeah. I mean, for the most part, you're like, yeah, those are pretty good. At least half his filmography, you're like, yeah, that checks out. It's a tough one. Here's something I just want to call out. We'll probably get to it more in the podcast. He's a director who's not a writer-director. And I think this is actually a strength. And so that makes every time they announce who he's working with all the more compelling. And I think, I don't even know if I think the pairing of David Fincher with Aaron Sorkin about the topic of Facebook was lightning in a bottle. Yeah. Lightning in a bottle. I don't know if they could even they've joked about a sequel. I don't think they could even do it in that way. It's, again, I already kind of tilted my hand here. I just think this movie is one where we're still going to look back 20 years and be like, this movie was talking about this thing that was happening to our culture. It was transforming the way we talk. And at the root of it is narcissism. At the root of it is selfishness. At the root of it is a really fickle guy who's upset his girlfriend didn't think he was the coolest shit. And the way I think Dalton, in fact, I think it was, if I'm citing this right, I think you had a Letterboxd review recently where you said it was bringing the kind of like judgmental, like Ivy League school experience to the masses. And I think that's what Facebook did. It kind of, everyone's trying to one up each other and how they appear to be. And it's had a very terrible, cancerous effect on our culture.
I get why it's like widely regarded as like one of the best movies of the 2010s, if not the century so far. I get why people love that movie. It's top 5 for me. I do think it rocks.
And I also think it's very funny. I really like Andrew. That was the big breakout for Andrew Garfield. That was the first time I saw him, and I said, this guy's really good.
He's so good.
And then obviously the casting choice of
Eisenberg?
Jesse Eisenberg as Mark Zuckerberg. You're just like, wow, couldn't have picked it better.
Do you know the story behind this? So Fincher kept I don't know if it was like friends, but he kept being told Eisenberg is who you should cast. And, obviously, of course, Fincher hates being told what to do. That's kind of makes sense when you hear that about him. And then they saw Eisenberg's tape, and he was like, oh, fuck, I have to cast this. I guess I have to cast this person. Yeah.
It could not have gotten it better. And they even look similar. It's crazy. Yeah. That is Mark Zuckerberg and Jesse Eisenberg. I have to go number 2, Zodiac. It's a master. I think it's another masterpiece. Is exploring our obsession with crime, true crime, being scared, but also examining what that really looks like underneath the surface. It explores, as Paris, you and Dalton have already said, obsession, and the cost and the toll that takes on us as individuals. I think it's an American classic, bona fide American masterpiece. It's a classic. I love it. And lastly, I'll go with Fight Club. It's a tough one, though. Gone Girl really is, like, that has to be one of the greatest, like, almost like cat and mouse games, but cat and mouse where they're, like, doing it for optics. So I want to give a shout out because I think that movie is also a masterpiece. The reason Fight Club stuck with me, and I enjoyed that movie a lot when I saw it, for all the reasons that, a teenage, early 20s white male would enjoy it.
We're part of the problem. We misunderstood that movie when we first saw it, probably.
Absolutely. But I also don't think there's a lot of us who have wised up. Here's the thing I think is interesting about it, though. And the reason it stuck with me, the humor, the attention to detail, all of it I love. The thing that I think now, looking back on it, is I think it really encapsulates the angst of the white male, middle-class white male experience that we were feeling at the end of the 90s that has had pretty significantly toxic impacts on the world that we live in today. Hence, you have, the Proud Boys using, like, the movie as a rallying cry. You already said it. You guys missed the point of the movie, and that's a problem. But also, I think that's the thing. They identified with the problem in the movie, not that the movie was critiquing the problem. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. On one hand, I think the movie is actually crazy savvy, crazy ahead of its time, very insightful, and incisive. But it's also become very apparent to me over the last, 10 years that, wow, a lot of people don't have media literacy skills to know how to like actually think about these movies. Yeah. So anyway, those are my top 3, but they're all good. All good. No one put Alien 3 up there though. I'm surprised.
I don't think Fincher would even put Alien 3 up there.
That's true.
Did he disavow himself in that? He didn't disavow himself, but he's not.
He doesn't answer questions about it. Doesn't like to talk about it.
Yeah.
Had no participation in the Alien quadrilogy like stuff. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Right. All right, ladies and gentlemen, those are our top 3 David Fincher films. What are your picks? You can let us know by hitting us up on social media on the Cinematropolis at Facebook, X, Shorts, or Instagram, or you can just send us an email at thecinematropolis@gmail.com. Without further ado, let's get into our spoiler-free review of The Killer.
I find music a useful distraction, a focus tool. Keeps the inner voice from wandering. This is what it takes. My process is purely logistical. If I'm effective, it's because of one simple fact. I don't give a
So according to IMDb, The Killer is described as, after a fateful near miss, an assassin battles his employers and himself on an international manhunt he insists isn't personal. So a couple of fun facts about this movie. The Killer arrived on Netflix this past weekend. That is November 10th. After having a very limited theatrical run earlier this fall. The film is based on a French comic book of the same name written by Alexis Nolan. I definitely pronounced that incorrectly. It also goes by Mats, with art by Luc Jacobin. I definitely said that wrong. The film stars Michael Fassbender as the titular killer. That also stars Arliss Howard, Charles Parnell, Carrie O'Malley, Sala Baker, and Tilda Swinton as the expert. And the film reunites director David Fincher with composers Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. This is their 5th collaboration together since 2010's The Social Network. And this is Fincher's 12th film as a director and 2nd feature film with Netflix following 2020's Mank, though we should call out that he's worked very closely with Netflix on several projects as a producer, including the hit show House of Cards, Mindhunter, and the animated series Death, Love, and Robots. With all that said, LaRon Chapman, we'll start with you. What are your overall thoughts on The Killer?
I really enjoyed this. I felt like it grabbed my attention in the first 10, 15 minutes or so. I do not think this is like earth-shattering Fincher, but by design. It feels very much like this is Fincher, on vacation, enjoying a strong cocktail. You know what I mean? It feels very much like he's just more eased into this, more relaxed. It still has all his signature craft and style, but without kind of the, the self-moralizing kind of, tone that he normally brings to these kinds of projects. And in many ways, it feels very reflective of his entire filmography, like he's commenting on his own, his own career, his own style. And so I appreciated that. It's a very breezy kind of easily rewatchable type of film. So, and yeah, it was just nice to see, kind of refreshing to see him have some fun, you know what I mean? And not hammering a message or something, so.
Definitely a palate cleanser coming off of Mank, which was his almost like an homage to his dad, using his dad's script, and it was definitely more prestige-y in nature for that. Paris Burris, what did you think of The Killer?
I also really enjoyed it. I watched it twice. Like I watched it the November 10th when it came out on Netflix, and then the very next day I watched it again. Not only because there were some things on the first watch I was just like, I need to go back and rewatch that. There's so much going on in this movie. And I feel like, honestly, after rewatching it, it's one of those movies that I feel like I could rewatch it over and over and over again. And it's almost addictive, which I want to get into at some point when we're talking about like pacing and editing. I think that's very intentional. I don't think it makes like my list of like, this is one of my favorite Fincher movies, but even like, I don't want to even say like lower tier. It's just, even though it's not my favorite Fincher, like Fincher, even when he's not like amazing and at his peak, is still one of the best filmmakers and making amazing movies. So even if I wasn't like amazed or blown away by The Killer, I still really enjoyed it and really appreciate it. And it has me thinking so much. But I agree. I think that Fincher is having fun, which is really nice to see, because I do think that it is a lot of he's criticizing and analyzing process and execution. And a lot of that is self-reflective, and we can definitely get into that more with like the deeper discussion. But I think, if it's very accessible too. So like, even if you've never seen a Fincher before, if this is like, just your first foray into Fincher's filmography, I think this would be a great starting point because it is so accessible. Right. With it being a Netflix movie too, like that's very intentional, I think, that they're trying to appeal to a mass audience. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's definitely worth a watch and a rewatch and another rewatch. And yeah, I'm just so happy that we can sit here and talk about a Fincher film, a new Fincher film that like feels like a Fincher film, you know? It's really exciting.
I mean, 'cause you gotta think really, he had Gone Girl in 2014, and then he's gone for 6 years until he comes back with Mank. And again, full credit to Mank. I admire the hell out of that movie. I don't think I ever want to watch it again, but I admire everything about it. But it's one of those.
Yeah, this is different.
This is actually fun.
Yeah, this is way different. It feels like, I mean, there are so many people who are talking about this movie who never even saw Mank. Right. You know what I mean? Right. So they were both on Netflix. I mean, it was during like the height of the pandemic, I think, when it came out. I don't, so it's just, this is more of a return to his like bread and butter.
I think you're saying, well, if you're going to pitch someone who'd never seen David Fincher before, you show them this.
Don't start with Mank.
No, you start with, you definitely absolutely don't start with that one. You start with The Killer is very accessible. Dalton, you were going to say something?
I just wanted to read you like my favorite thing from Mank is Arliss Howard as Louis B. Mayer. Do you remember this line? Oh, yeah. This is a business where the buyer gets nothing for his money but a memory. What he bought still belongs to the man who sold it. That's the real magic of the movies, and don't let anybody tell you different. That's the Finch man on the movies, I think. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I agree. I just caught up with Mank and sort of the Fincher prep, and so I'm like kind of, it's like way towards the back of the ranking for me, but like I'm still kind of swimming in that movie. There's a lot to like about it.
Oh yeah, no, there's tons to like about it, and so
like
much
maybe
to admire.
his most overtly political movie in some ways.
Definitely.
Yeah, even like mid-tier Fincher is still amazing. Like it's still like miles ahead of most movies and filmmakers. Like it's still just amazing. So
it's meticulous. Dalton Stuart, what did you think of The Killer?
We're so back, baby. We're so back. Oh, guys, I fucking love this movie. Yeah, I'm right there with Paris. I've already watched this twice. We watched it that Friday night, and then Beck fell asleep during the last stretch of it. So we
started from the beginning, of course.
Well, we rewatched the second half of it, and then I was like, I got to rewatch this whole thing now. So I've seen it like 2.5 times now. I think it's so good. It's this. This top procedural. It's also deeply funny. Has the best one-on-one fight scene you'll see all year, and like I'm including John Wick 4 in that, which has some spectacular fights. But as far as like one-on-one stuff goes, like it doesn't get any better than this. And then at the same time, so it's this super accessible hitman movie. Goes down smooth. It's just a nice, fun genre exercise. But like if you give yourself over to what it's doing, you get this like surprisingly emotional tale about a really repressed guy who stands in for the way that we all see ourselves as, outsiders set apart from society. It's like the ways in which we're all the killer, man. That's what I'm going for today. And you just get these internal monologues about the job that like represent the lies we all tell ourselves about our own processes and like the construction, the personalities we can construct for ourselves. And and the way we move about the world. Like, yeah, I think there's a lot going on in this movie. I like it a lot.
We'll get more to it in spoilers, but it is extremely notable and deeply funny that he's constantly reciting his philosophy to himself, and at almost every corner, whenever he's like rubber meets the road, he does not follow it whatsoever. It's kind of hilarious.
Oh, it's very It's like the whole movie is like talking out of both sides of its mouth constantly. It's really funny in that sort of like dramatic irony sort of way. And like as a movie about process, and Paris, you've kind of alluded to this already, it's a movie about fucking up a lot. So I think as we start to talk about the man's reputation as a perfectionist, I think we'll start to talk more about this movie and sort of maybe the ways that this film signals perfection's sort of a fleeting thing to chase.
I would say I think I'm with everyone at the table here. I had a blast with this movie. I think it's super fun. It's lean. It's mean. It really, it's all of Fincher's style that I love. I feel I think the material's a lot lighter in its ambitions, but that's okay. Not every movie needs to be Zodiac. Not every movie needs to be Social Network. And I really, really admire this. Reminds me a lot of Panic Room, frankly, in terms of like how you're just like in it. It's like a ride in a good way. It's a ride that has a lot going on underneath the surface, but that first time it's just it's a thrill. Your adrenaline's constantly pumping. The fight scene, I never, it's crazy. You're just so in it. You're like, oh, he could totally die right now. Like it's really intense. He's fighting a dude 3 times his size. It's just man. And Fincher just knows what he's doing at there's so much confidence instilled in how things are shot. The sound mixing, Paris, you mentioned, was incredible. I love the opening. Yeah. All that's to say, we'll get into the weeds of it. I just think this is the quintessential. If you meet someone who's never seen a Fincher movie, or they're not familiar, or they're like, oh, I've seen like one, you say, well, go watch this. And if you dig this, then I've got 5 other movies for you. Like, check this out.
It's the Taylor Swift eras of his career. You know what I mean? Like, it's just playing the hits of every part of his career.
Gripping the opening sequence, I was in from like minute 2. I was like, all right, okay, an internal monologue. I see what he's kind of doing, and then it just doesn't stop until the movie's over. It's a great ride.
And it's sub 2 hours? Are you kidding me?
I know. I love it.
Get out of here.
Crazy.
Coming off of the other movie about the killings of flower moons and such, it was nice to have a movie that was very short, swift, and still accomplished all its goals so well. Yeah, so nice. Well, how would you guys compare this to Fincher's other movies? I like to think of this as the catnip version, where you're like the light, like I say, you kind of get all the tips and the isms without necessarily having to examine the soul of America all in one take. Dalton, I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, while I was watching this, my friend Kirsten pointed out that this is his most Fight Clubby movie since 1999, and I totally get what they meant by that, because this, it's got this wry, sardonic sense of humor that Fincher always has, but it's being delivered through this first-person, very subjective point of view. And so, much like Fight Club, you are just boom, you're in it with your narrator, and you're hearing their worldview and their perception of reality, and it is very much kind of in that mode in some ways. It's funny how much this feels like that film, despite being. I think Andrew Kevin Walker did some uncredited passes on Fight Club, if I remember the story right. I could be wrong on that, but I know he's. Ever since his big success with Se7en, I know he's worked uncredited a lot throughout his career. But the screenplay is just like so silly in its way, and I think like with much of his filmography, it's got that humor in it. I mean, that's on my rewatches of his films, over the last couple of months. That's one thing I've really hit on is just how funny all of them are. There really is an intense sense of humor going through really every single one of his movies. And it is always usually, very, very wry, very dry. But this one especially, I think, has got that going for it. And again, I think it's got all the process stuff, the procedural stuff of something like Dragon Tattoo or Zodiac. But then again, it has this sort of, propulsive first person thing going for it. So yeah, as some of you have already said, like it's doing the Fincher tricks and then sort of taking from other aspects of his films and kind of fusing it together into this really, really effective package.
Mm-hmm. Paris, what do you think about in terms of how you compare this to some of his others?
Yeah, I definitely see a lot of similarities to a lot of his other movies. I mean, I think there are some staples that you can like expect from a Fincher film. Like you can expect probably a really kick-ass title sequence. You can expect nihilism and like muted tones throughout. Like his movies are very like bleak, not only in tone but in look too. Like everything's very just neutral and muted and cold. And so I think it lends itself to all the things you would hope for and expect in a Fincher movie. But strangely, like, it does something so completely different too, in that I think how self-aware it is. Like, it's not to say that his other movies weren't, but I think that he has grown throughout his career and like as a person, not just as a director.
Right.
And like you can really see that because he is being so self-critical and so self-analytical and self-reflective in this. It's interesting to me because as far as I remember, and I don't think this is a spoiler, but like it's broken up into chapters,
right.
is all I'll say. And I don't, off the top of my head, I can't think of any other Fincher movies that do that.
Not like this deliberately.
Right.
Overtly, yeah.
Yeah. So this is a very different kind of like pacing and editing style for him, even though the editing is very like, it's very, I mean, just impeccable editing. Like all of his movies, the editing always just blows me away, and it still is amazing in this movie. And then you have the Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross score, which we've seen. This is, I think, the fifth score that he's done. So it's like you're getting all of the things. Like I think if you're a Fincher fan, like you are gonna get those things that you're looking forward to, but you're getting something just so much different. Like I can't get into the ending too much in this section, but like it's such a different ending than so many of his movies.
Right.
It's almost like shocking.
I was so surprised by the ending of this
Right?
movie.
I was just like,
The line it goes out on, I was like, oh, that's the movie you were making.
yeah,
Oh.
yeah, and like just so, and so when we're talking about like process and execution, that's something I really want to get in. That's very different too from his other movies, because I think that he is taking himself less seriously.
Yes.
He is not focused so much on being a perfectionist in this movie. He's just having fun and allowing himself to kind of not take himself, like when you are a perfectionist, as he's widely been hailed as, in the context of David Fincher, it's usually positive. Like people praise him for being a perfectionist as if that's like a good thing.
Unless you're Gary Oldman on Take 100 and Mank.
Right. So like it's good to recognize his craft. But at the same time, perfectionism is not a good thing. It is not good
Very
for you
unhealthy.
as a person. Like he has to be very stressed about that, you know? And that has to have a huge impact on how he approaches his work and how he makes movies. So I think, you know, to leave it just kind of like non-spoilery, I think that he's really easing up on himself here. And I think that's very intentional, and it's very refreshing. So it's you know, it's got all those staples of Fincher-isms, but it's so refreshing to see him just kind of like have fun with it.
Right.
One of the things that I think has been interesting in sort of what you've seen in the interviews around this one is how much he sort of like eschews that auteur stuff. He's like, oh, no, stop. Ew, gross. But if you ask one of his collaborators something, they'll go, oh, well, that was David. So it's like, okay, buddy, whatever you say.
He also does not like being labeled a perfectionist, even though he's clearly got a very specific vision he's trying to nail every time.
Well, you don't get blocking and camera movement that precise if you don't do it a bunch of times. I don't know what to tell you.
And I mean, it's not always enjoyable. Like, he probably doesn't like the fact that he has to be like that. You know what I mean? Like, because I'm someone too who's I have like jealousy or envy of people who can just kind of like not be in their heads all the time.
Right.
Yeah, what must
Like,
that be
you know
like?
what I mean? Like, so it's like when people tell him he's a perfectionist, he doesn't take that as like, oh yes, this is a thing that makes me happy as a person.
Right.
Right.
Like, no, this tortures me and drives me crazy. I guarantee
he looks
you.
as a criticism.
He probably lays in bed at 2:30 a.m. He's like, oh man, I don't think the 75th take got that shot the way I wanted it.
Well,
You know what I
right,
mean?
like he's looking at footage of Zodiac, and he is literally determining that Jake Gyllenhaal does not have enough hair on his fingers, and that he needs to go in and CGI more hair on his fingers. Like, it's a great attention to detail, but how maddening.
The one I just
right?
heard about this morning was, I guess, on the commentary for Gone Girl. He's like, the first thing he says is, yeah, we had to have Rosman and wigs for this movie, and wig technology hasn't come very far in this past 100 years, so there's just a CGI edit of her wig line in basically every shot of her head.
Yeah.
Of course, yeah, my God.
And it's like, yes, you get a good product out of that, but, and I'm not saying that, we don't benefit, but we benefit more than he does, I think.
Oh, yeah,
because
no,
it's
it's
like,
not
yes,
healthy.
you're getting your
That's
vision
true.
across, but at what cost?
Right.
And I think that's really at the heart of The Killer.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and, yeah, because the whole movie is really self-examination of someone who's obsessed with detail like that, and I think you can just sense it. Like it's a fun movie. It's super fun. It's self-aware, and it doesn't ever take itself too seriously. And I think for those beats to land, you have to have a director who's self-aware enough to know that I'm kind of ridiculous, right? I'm ridiculous. This guy's ridiculous. Like, let's just have fun with it.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah.
LaRon, what about you? What are your how would you kind of compare this to some other Fincher's other films?
Yeah, this film is so unserious to me, and in a really refreshing and enjoyable way. Like, it feels very much like this is his first like flat out comedy. You know what I mean? Like a dark comedy. But still but what's interesting is it still has the technical prowess that we come to know with him. Like how lines are delivered in this movie, super precise. Like Tilda Swinton has to say a certain thing, at a certain moment for it to stick the way that he wants it to, And
Just
so
slip on the ice like something like 15 times or something like that.
Yeah, like everything just feels so super. Like, but it also still feels like it's commenting on it because these inner mantras that he's having, like by the 40th time that he says the run, I'm saying them too, and I'm just sitting here like, well, I wonder if he's gonna do number 4 right because I mean, like I'm thinking about it in my head because the process is also like just kind of like spiraling in your own head. But yeah, in terms of comparative, like his other films, like it does feel like this is as close to like you said, like a Panic Room. But I'd even go further. I'd say it's more like The Game in a way.
Okay.
In terms of the playfulness that is kind of at in display here. And that's what's nice about it too. There's a lightness to it. I mean, amongst all the carnage, you know what I mean? Like you're just having a good time. I hate to say it's like empty calories, but it does feel like you're having an ice cream sundae instead of like the full meal. But like you're enjoying it. Like this is what I need right now.
Yeah, but not every. That's what I'm saying. Not every David Fincher needs to be a
this
steak
is a
dinner.
This is a David Fincher dessert. You know what I mean? Like like it's just sweet. Maybe it's not good for you, but like you don't have any regrets with it.
And I think to Dalton's point, we're back again. We don't want to dismiss Mank, but it's just nice. Having not had a movie that felt like the Fincher that you've appreciated since 2014, it's like, oh my God, he still knows how to make that movie. And he showed us he knows how to make that movie and have fun making it.
Yeah.
Just
Mank is the lima beans or the kale of his career. Like it's good for you.
It makes sense he made a Hollywood movie.
Yeah,
He's at that tier. How do you not make a Hollywood movie? But also like, do we really want that from this guy? I don't think so.
Well, who wrote the screenplay to Mank?
His
Was
dad.
that his dad?
Yeah.
So for
Who
me
never
too,
worked in movies. It's
right.
like,
So
yeah.
for me too, David Fincher obviously is not going to do a project that he doesn't care about, but it felt like all of his projects are very specifically picked and curated to his
Sensibilities.
right. And I think Mank was more so
Somebody else.
something he did with his dad or for his dad. You
yeah.
know what I mean? So I don't know how. I'm sure he did care very much about it, but maybe if that it wouldn't have been for that connection, he wouldn't have gone for that project because it's just so different than yeah.
I think that's well said. My understanding is it was like a tribute to his late father, who never had the career in Hollywood that he dreamed of, sort of thing. And again, it's admirable for that. And a lot of valuable history in Hollywood that probably doesn't get discussed enough. But also, I like seeing this assassin movie where he's just like constantly. You're right, Laurent. He takes it. The killer in the movie takes himself so seriously. It's kind of hilarious.
Yeah,
it's just from
the first sequence. Like we're like, okay, so this guy is serious. Like he's in it. We're learning about his process immediately, and then immediately fucks up, and you're like, oh well, he's not even very good at his own job. Like. He sounded like he was.
So 20 minutes of it, Laurent.
Yeah, no,
just him doing yoga. Yeah.
And it's all build up, and you can see it. I gotta say too, the tension. Again, another thing we haven't mentioned yet is that David Fincher is just really great at ratcheting up tension. All it is a dude doing yoga, setting up for an assassination,
eating an egg McMuffin without the English muffin. Yeah.
And the whole time I'm like, oh man, what? It's not gonna go how he plans. You just know where's the movie, and then you're just waiting for the other needle to drop or whatever, and it was amazing. It's a great sequence.
And kind of to what Paris said, just about like how at what cost, at what sacrifice does like just laboring over and over and over, what does it do? And then if you make Fincher this character in this movie, like the fact that he's laboring over how precise everything has to be, and then one thing goes wrong and everything just spirals, and it's just kind of like. Because life isn't perfect. You know what I mean? Like you're gonna have flaws in this, and you got to be okay with it. So it feels kind of like a comment on that too. Like, again, don't take yourself so seriously. Like things are gonna go wrong no matter how many times you go over it.
And we'll get to the ending. It does end in some surprising places. I have to say, I was surprised by how the pretty much the last act, everything after Tilda Swinton, we have all the stuff with Tilda Swinton takes a different direction than I was expecting, and I really liked it for that. Okay. Let's save the rest of the good stuff for spoilers. Letter grades on The Killer. Paris Burris, what letter grade would you give The Killer?
I think I'm going with a solid B.
Very B?
Yeah.
I think it's a good B. B's good. Dalton Stuart?
This is an A for me. Yeah, we're just shy of going all the way on this one. Yeah, I think this is, again, like, it's just as good as he's ever been. It's all the stuff you want from him, and he's giving it. He's like, yeah, I know what you want, you sick freaks. You want to see this guy shoot somebody. Well, I'm going to give it to you, and you're going to hate it. It's going to ruin the whole movie. Yeah, I think this is like way smarter than its trappings would lead you to believe. I think there's a lot more going on under the surface. I'm not even a big Smiths fan. I don't really like the Smiths at all. Maybe it's just because I don't like Morrissey. I found the Smiths after Morrissey revealed himself to be a shit. So it's kind of colored by that. Yeah, nobody introduced the Smiths to me before we learned Morrissey sucked. So even with that, but I think that choice kind of shows you the hidden heart of this movie. I mean, you cannot deny those songs are like some of the great pop love songs of the late 20th century, right? They're all very much about longing, and I think that kind of shows a secret sentimentality to this movie that might be the key to unlocking it. I don't know. Yeah, I like A. Big time. Big fan.
All right. B, A, Laurent Chapman.
I'm an A- on this. Yeah, this is a breezy, fun, like just a good time. Almost, like I said, just kind of like, I don't want to say empty style, because I don't want to make it seem like it's like you can't, there's nothing substantive here, but you don't have to go into it with that. You know what I mean? You can just have a good time with it. It goes down very smoothly. So, but yeah, I'm like Fincher, Fassbender, the Smiths. For me, that's bliss. That's the Smiths are the cherry on top for me. I'm like, oh yeah, this is speaking my language.
Yeah, I man, you guys have talked to me. If I was going to go B-, but I think I'll go a solid B, because I do think it's super fun. I think here's the key. I think you need to set your okay, for newbies, I think this is a perfect recommend. Fincher and Gateway and Fincher. I think for a lot of especially those of us at the table, I have had some other friends of the show who did not like this movie as much as we did, and it's because I think they were expecting I need Fincher to come out and say something profound, and this is just not really that kind of movie. And by my book, that's okay. In fact, I think that was a good choice to make coming off of Mank. This is a great time. It shows that he knows his audience. He knows what people like. He knows himself. We're going to talk about an interview in the spoiler section that he gave where I really sense the growth as a person, as Paris put it, in the self-awareness there. And, it's a good time. It's a recipe for fun. And if you don't take it so seriously. If you take it seriously, I think you're going to miss out on the greatest joys this movie has to offer.
The pleasure this has to offer, yeah.
I would direct those viewers, though, on their second watch to remember that maybe the 10-minute mark, he has a line about how the blood of the many is the mortar that holds together civilization. Tell me this movie's not about anything. Okay.
Oh, man. I love it. What other alternate media recommendations would we give that could be movies, television, novels, music, video games, or other media? LaRon Chapman.
Recent pick, I would say John Wick 4. Again, exercise in style. A lesser known, underrated pick, I would say The American with George Clooney. Also an assassin film about isolation and process. And then a well-known choice being, Kill Bill Volume 1 and 2. I feel like these films are kind of all big, heavy on style, in process, but also kind of have the same playful feel that, that this one does, in terms of genre. So.
Assassin movies, aren't they great? I mean, there's a lot of bad ones, but a lot of them are very good too. Yeah. Paris Burris, what would you recommend to our listeners?
So I have a couple of movie recommendations. I think it is so refreshing to finally see Fassbender like in a movie, just like he's been gone for a while, so like
been too busy racing the damn cars. Get out of Le Mans, get back in the pictures.
Yeah, and I've always been a Fassbender fan, but I think this movie really like put him just in a whole other level for me. And so for an amazing Michael Fassbender lead performance, go watch 2011's Shame. Because I mean, if you like Fassbender, then that's like one of his best roles ever.
Absolutely.
And it's also just like an underrated kind of. We never really talked about this movie just in general. Like I think it's worth watching if you like Fassbender. My other recommendation is also another 2011 movie. I don't know why I'm on 2011 today, but Drive.
I've got Drive on my list.
Yeah, I think it's if you like watching just hot men go around killing people, like, and they're super stoic and like not unemotional, but very reserved emotions. Like I think Fassbender's performance in The Killer is very reminiscent of Ryan Gosling's performance in Drive, which is one of my favorite performances just ever. And it's a very much more serious kind of movie than The Killer. It's not as like funny, but it is very similar in many ways as far as just like the subject matter. And I think the performance is really worth seeing kind of the similarities between Fassbender in The Killer and Gosling in Drive.
Also a very different style, but also a baller soundtrack.
For sure.
Dalton Stuart.
I mean, the whole time I was watching this movie, I was like, to me, this is the video game Hitman. So you got to go check out IO Interactive's Hitman games. They just redid, basically, they just put out 3 of them that were sort of a retooling of the entire franchise. But it's this whole thing, like, it's got the same sort of wry sense of humor these games do, like, very much kind of note for note, the same sort of humor that you get in this movie. Just sort of like the ways in which people are like low-key bad and just get allowed to get away with it. And it's every target you have in these games are so comically evil. And it's, all about process, finding security key codes and, putting on a costume and disposing of a body and making a death look like an accident. Like it is all the stuff in this movie is in those games, and they're so fun. So if you're into video games, I would strongly recommend you check those out. I too had, like I said, had Drive on my list. Paris is so right, like as far as the sort of low-key love story that's not really about love at all, but it's because it's not about love because it's about a very reserved and repressed person being in love. And again, is got a great thumping synthy soundtrack. Stoic, but very kind of striking photography and lighting. Yeah, definitely. Fuck Luc Besson, obviously, but The Professional is the film that kind of got me into this franchise. I remember that just being on cable all the time when I was like 10 or 11 and falling in love with that movie. It's just such a cool film. Yeah,
it's one of my favorites.
Yeah, it's huge place in the gray matter for me. Gary Oldman screaming everyone. Come on, that's a classic. So yeah, check out the Professional or Leon, depending on what the region is. And if you're like me, you also need to catch up with Jean-Pierre Melville's Le Samurai from the 60s, which is again kind of one of the texts for this type of like lone assassin process movies. Fassbender actually had, I guess, just rewatched The Samurai and was telling his agent, we need to find something like this when the killer came to him. So very kind of interesting overlap there. So that's the recommendations from me. What about you, Caleb?
I'm going to go slightly different direction, more with assassin movies, though. Another director known for his obsession with to detail, Steven Soderbergh's Haywire.
Nice.
Him also having a fun time.
Fassbender also sick fight scene in that one. Yeah.
Yeah, right? See, that's what I'm saying. There's a lot, again, very different movies, but there's a lot of overlap in terms of like the pleasures I got from both of those movies. And also just another undersea one, certainly more dramatic, but an undersea assassin movie that I really like was Joe Wright's Hannah, starring Saoirse Ronan. Back in 2011. Good year, apparently.
Good year.
Yeah. Just really cool use of style, use of chapters is also a big part of that story. And I think people talked about it for a hot minute in 2011, but it doesn't come up very often.
Yeah, there's an Amazon series adaptation,
Based on
everything. Yeah, I like that. Hey, you know what else came out in 2011?
Drive.
Girl with the Dragon Tattoo.
And the Girl with the Dragon
Yeah,
Tattoo.
yeah.
No, it was Drive 2010.
No, Drive's 2011. Yeah, Paris
Guys,
had that right.
what were-
2011 was cooking.
That's right. So Paris, 2011. The theme is that was a great year for assassin movies in general. But lastly, I'm just calling out movies that are even tangentially related to assassins that I think people should go see. Drew Goddard's unsung 2018 film Bad Times at the El Royale. Very, very different film. It's really, I wouldn't even call it an assassination film per se. More like there's an assassin an assassin, but a lot of mystery surrounding who's assassinating who and what's going wrong. But really great use of great score, great style, throwback kind of like style of that pulpy
mid-century sort of architecture and interior design. Yeah, the movie that's a corker.
That's a great movie that like nobody saw.
Yeah.
So highly recommend that. All right. Well, with that said, let's go ahead and move into our spoiler discussion for The Killer. So if you don't want to be spoiled on The Killer, go ahead and tune out now.
Put the gun down. I saw you with the box. What was in the box?
Because I envy your normal life.
Put the gun down, David.
It seems that envy is my sin.
Oh, what's in the box? Not till you give me the gun. What's in the fucking box? Give me the gun.
All right. So I'm going to say it now because it's a spoiler section. So put it out there. The word competence porn. Firstly, I think it's such a great way to describe this movie. But David Fincher in a lot of movies. But like it's the idea of just watching a person be highly, highly, highly skilled at doing executing a process and just watching how that works. So I think of it like the Ocean's 11 heist movies. Part of what makes those movies super fun is really the build up to the process is kind of interesting, but when you see how they execute it, you're just like fascinated. It's mesmerizing. So David Fincher, being the dedicated craftsman that he is, again, we've already talked about with the reputation as a perfectionist, known for doing dozens of takes. And I made the joke on the scene on the set of Mank. Apparently, they filmed the big dinner sequence over 100 times, in which Gary Oldman said, "I've already done it over 100 effing times." And Fincher said, "And we're going to do it the 101st time." Right? So I want to dig into what's the read here? How does the killer's attention to meticulous details of an assassin really lend itself to Fincher's obsession as a filmmaker? And Paris, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think it's absolutely essential in this movie because that's exactly what it's kind of about. Like, I mean, it's about a lot of things. A lot of things are going on. But for me, it's really like he is making the argument, one of many arguments I think this movie is making, that it's not all about execution. It's not all about perfection. It's not all about, because there's more to craft than that. So really what I took away from it initially, and it kind of solidified on my rewatch, is this is a movie about people making mistakes and what happens to those people when they make those mistakes. Who gets off, who gets punished, and who does it affect? Because a lot of it too is he's raising the question of, it's not like he necessarily says at any point in the movie, I'm an outsider, I'm so different than everyone else. But like he's through his internal monologue and his internal, dialogue with himself, he's making it very clear that he doesn't fit in. He's saying if you can't handle boredom, then you can't do this job. And he's saying, by way of saying that, I can handle it because I'm that person, So like, but what it ultimately asks though is, how is he any different than any of these people? How is he any different than Tilda Swinton's character? He would have done the same dang thing.
And he resents that her life is more normal than his, right?
Right.
Yeah.
He absolutely would have made the same choices, and you know what I mean? He's done the same things. He's done worse. He reminisces about drowning people. And then Tilda Swinton has that whole monologue about I think it's a bear or
bear.
And it's like, are you really out here because that's what you're doing, or is there something else in it for you?
Right.
And he's constantly asking. He tells in his mantra, "What's in it for me?" Ask yourself that every step of the way.
Right.
And I don't think he has the answer to that question. He doesn't know what's in it for him. He's not benefiting from any of this.
No,
Yet Tilda Swinton's over there eating gourmet dessert, enjoying the hell out of her life. And she doesn't seem to be as haunted by all of this that he is very clearly haunted by.
Even the lawyer says, you've got more money than you could spend in your lifetime. Why are you still doing this thing?
Right.
But he doesn't know.
So I really think I love Tilda's character and her performance. I would love to see her get a Best Supporting nom. Oh my gosh, that would be amazing, because I think she accomplishes so much in the limited screen time she's given. But it's really as a juxtaposition for his character. Like, that's me sitting across the table. She's an assassin. I'm an assassin. It's just I got to her first. And then really at the end, it's, brought back with him kind of, he's got his wherever he is on this luxurious location with this luxurious plate of food or whatever, and now he's basking in the sun enjoying his life. But when is the person going to come to get him? So I really, anyways, I think the meticulousness of all of that is being examined in a way of like, is it really that valuable? Is it really that important? Because when you're watching the movie, like, there's a moment too where he is, what is he doing at the very beginning? He's trying to get the perfect shot. Like,
Right.
that's literally his,
Yeah.
and when he's setting up his gun, it immediately, I was like, oh, that's like a camera.
Yeah.
Like, he's setting up his camera, he's trying to get the perfect shot, and then, so it's really the heart of this movie is, I don't think it's like praising craft or execution or process. I think it's just examining it and being like, by way of showing us that there's more to this character than just his abilities. He's saying there's more to people than just what you see and how they serve you. Yeah, so that's just like my long-winded way of saying the meticulousness is the part.
point.
Yeah, it's the point. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'd 100% agree, and I like that you add the layer there, thinking about how he's so focused. There's more to people. His process is very meticulous, but notice he doesn't fall. There are several key moments where he's made judgy statements, but then himself, when he gets caught in a situation that he's not prepared for, reacts exactly how other people would react and totally abandons the philosophy in that moment. But then when he snaps back to the when he feels like he's in control, right back to the philosophy. And again, how many of us live our lives that way? We have this is how I live, this is how I live. Something bad happens, and then all of a sudden all that's out the window, and then you revert back after when you regain control. And I think the same is, I don't know, you guys are filmmakers. I'm likely a similar feeling when you're
I am a perfectionist, and it is a problem. So yes.
Yeah, I not to like go on and on again, but like just I think a lot of that beginning sequence, which I think is just the most beautiful sequence in the whole movie. It's about how it's cognitive dissonance. There's a version of yourself in your mind, and then there's the actual you.
Right.
And I think in his mind, he is someone who is very concerned with the things that he is telling himself he's concerned with. But at the same time, he's saying, I don't give a fuck.
Literally
so I don't
says
think he actually cares. He wants to be the person who cares.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well said. Dalton, what's your take on the meticulousness of the film?
You know, I think even at this point in his career, Fincher seems like somebody who identifies himself as a mercenary more than an artist, right? He's a gun for hire. He's still the dude who made the smoking 2001 baby for the American Cancer Society.
Yeah.
You know, he's still that dude. And at the same time, he's the one who brings Andrew Kevin Walker the story and has like the whole movie laid out and says, hey, let's make the screenplay for me. Like, let's make this movie. So I think it's very interesting. We're going to keep insisting that the killer is sort of a Fincher stand-in, and it's hard not to, I think. And as much as he's probably going to insist that, no, that's definitely not me, I think even if that is how he truly feels, whether that's, we can never know if that's a put on, and that's kind of the point of the movie. You don't know what's a put on for people, and you don't know what isn't. And I think Paris is so right to identify the heart of the movie being the scene with Tilda Swinton and then the epilogue back in the Dominican Republic. I think those two beats really are the heart of the film and kind of lay it all out, because it's in those conversations not even a conversation, it's in listening to Tilda that the killer comes the closest to breaking and maybe giving up a little bit more of himself, and maybe having a drink with her and maybe sharing some of how he feels. And obviously he doesn't, but it's that seeing somebody who's living an even more normal life than he is outside of the job, that gives him this that we can kind of infer, like, gives him this sense of jealousy. Maybe obviously he's going to kill her no matter what, because he's trying to leave no loose ends for this revenge rampage that he's on. But I definitely think there's that note of seeing somebody who also fucked up and not have, she has that line about, you thought you'd sit across from me and feel nothing but reassured. And he doesn't. That's not how he feels about this. He doesn't feel good about this. And, it's going to Claiborne. And it's very funny that the only named character in this movie is the billionaire. And he doesn't finish off the revenge where at the end of the trail, right? Because he realizes this guy's is just as much a functionary as he is. And it's going home and being back at home that the monologue gets the most honest there in that final epilogue, where he's like, no, fate is a placebo. We are just all of the decisions that are behind us. And if you can't handle that, maybe you're not one of the few. Maybe you're just like me, one of the many. And it's that finally that admission of, no, I am not one of the few. I'm one of the idiots. I'm the blood that is the mortar that holds society together. And I think that's Fincher being like, yeah, I'm never going to make an impact on the 7.8 billion people that exist. Like, there's too much content. I'm not the guy anymore, because that's not how this industry is set up anymore. So again, I think there's all these kind of fun parallels between, artist and assassin, process and filmmaking, and again, like, perfectionism as a burden and not as something to be celebrated. So yeah, I think there's all kinds of fun stuff going on in there. And again, it's, as Paris said, like, the movie starts with him, like, the inciting incident is him failing to get the perfect shot. Right. So it's all right there. Yeah. I
love it. LaRon, anything you want to add about this film's attention to meticulous details?
Well, I'm playing with that same line. I think his meticulousness in this film just basically is, this whole film is just him essentially, being self-aware of his own flaws. You know what I mean? And I think that's the beauty of it, because you think this is a story about him wanting to be one of the few, but it's his also admission to the fact that, yes, I am a perfectionist, and as you said, it is a burden. But he even says in an interview that we're going to talk about later, that it is kind of like it's something he doesn't know how else to be. Like, this is how I know to do the thing. But I am aware, as all of you have said about me, that yes, this is something that I'm very meticulous about doing. But I love that he's able to do that with a self-critical eye, but also with a sense of humor. It's kind of like, yeah, I get it, but we can laugh at this a little bit, like, right, you know. So he's not as pretentious as some people might think he is. He's actually able to talk about himself.
How self-serious Fassbender is in the movie is where I feel like a lot of the humor comes from, and that is, I think, Fincher leaning into, we're gonna make this overly serious, only so when he screws up, it's hilarious. It's just like,
and it's all for naught.
All
it's
this
like,
for that. You're so out of touch with the world that you're living in.
All that
it's great.
All that process, all that detail, all this training. Just to fuck up anyway, like everyone else.
He's thinking to himself, only fight the battles you're paid to fight, as he gets tackled by a 300-pound dude who he doesn't have to fight.
No.
Exactly.
He's choosing to go fight.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have much more to add to it, other than I just think it's good to see what Fincher's doing here, and I'm interested to see what he does next, which we'll talk about here more in a minute. But seeing this sort of like self-awareness, I think at this point in his career, I mean, he's only in his 60s, so he's still got a good, however long he wants to keep making movies, but at least
look, Marty's 80 and he's still.
That's what I'm saying. And if this is the beginning of late stage Fincher, I'm all here for it, and give me more. And I think it only is going to lead to even better, sharper pictures, as Marty would say, in the future. Well, let's talk a bit more about his reputation, as we've already alluded to. David Fincher, the nihilist. I know Dalton's got something to say about that, but I want to point this out because in 2019 we got Gone Girl before he released Mank 6 years later in 2020. Again, we've already talked about much different fare, and The Killer brings us back to this sort of throwback. Again, I think Panic Room. The Game's a good one. I haven't watched that one in a while, but that is a really fun movie. In an interview with The Guardian, Fincher said that he thinks of this movie, The Killer, like a good B movie, and said, "I just didn't want to take it quite as seriously." So I just wanted, as we think about Fincher shifting into the kind of the next phase of his career, what do you think he does best, and how do you think that The Killer really reflects more of a kind of a marriage of his older styles and techniques along with sort of this newfound self-awareness? And Lauren, I'll start with you.
I think his films are, again, they're more self-referential. They're more insightful because normally he's somewhat at a distance from the work. Like you can see the technical prowess, but he's like adding his personality into it now. You know what I mean? Like, his own thought process into it. And that's just really fascinating to see because you don't always get to see, you know what I mean? Like the man behind them, in a lot of work. Some artists people like Tarantino, like, they have their own signature, like where it's like, this is me. Like we get like we feel like we know him through his movies. And I feel like Fincher's films are always more, about the process and the actual craft of it. But here we're getting like, the artist, his own, what he thinks, his philosophies, his life, his and I think that's a very interesting thing to be able to.
He's using how cold his movies feel as an advantage. You know what I mean? Like it's part of the cognitive dissonance that you talked about, Paris. Like that is, he utilizes that in this movie.
Yeah.
Oh, you feel like you know me because these are all cold, dark. But now we're gonna make that the joke.
And
that's the personality shining through.
Well, I think you're right, Laurent, that like it's only with 12 movies of history to look back on that you go, oh, there's like a lot of similar protagonists here. And you're like, oh, okay. Like you realize like there's a lot more of the guy in the work than maybe you would have first realized because it is also kind of cold.
And detached,
Yeah, but then there's also the open-hearted sentimentality of Benjamin Button, which, it's like this really kind of dark death meditation, but it is a romance as much as it is anything else.
Yeah.
It's a very sweet movie.
Yeah, I love that movie. I know a lot of people are kind of out on that one and see it as like, oh, the weird, the un-Fincher movie, but I think that his shit is all over that.
Oh, absolutely.
I think him and Eric Roth like came together to, I think that as much as Social Network, it's like him working with like a really high-level screenwriter and taking their sensibilities and merging them in a really interesting way. It's unlike, him and Andrew Kevin Walker seem like kind of similar dudes, whereas him and Roth and him and Sorkin like seem way, way different. So it's kind of an interesting mesh of sensibilities.
You would think the perfectionism between him and Sorkin would
I just love picturing him just like drawing lines through Sorkin's screenplay. Like, Aaron, are you kidding me? Nobody would say that.
Oh my God. Paris, what do you make of sort of this evolution of Fincher style that we see here?
Yeah, it's really interesting because, I mean, I've been a fan of Fincher, but it's really upon these recent rewatches of his older movies that I'm like seeing all of the thematic elements that come together, because I think really at the heart of the vast majority of his movies is looking at human nature, which in and of itself is not groundbreaking. I think cinema in general, like that's the number one thing that we're looking at in most movies is human nature. But really, he is approaching that in his own unique way, in that, I mean, I think of like, so Gone Girl, for example, so much of the movie is not knowing what's real, what's not, what's being presented to you, what's being, fabricated, who's a good person, who's not a good person. Like, because you go through this back and forth of like Ben Affleck's character, for example, like, is he a wife murderer? Is he an innocent guy who's being framed? And there's literally within minutes of each other, you go back and forth because you're like, oh, well, maybe he's not so bad. And then it's like, oh, he's cheating on his wife. So maybe he isn't as good as I thought he was. Like, that's the whole thing that's happening in a lot of his movies is what makes someone a good person? What makes someone a bad person? Is there such a thing as, because ultimately what he concludes is we're all complicated. Like, so I think that's still happening here because he's just taking it a little further of like looking at, well, is someone being good at their job what makes them worthwhile as a person?
Right.
Because like, what if he is the best assassin in the world? Does that make him any better than anyone else? Like, I think he's just really questioning like, I think the biggest thing for him too is he is anti-establishment in many of his works. Yeah. I mean, he himself is someone who didn't go to film school. Right. He's never won an Oscar. He's doing like these fancy photo shoots for these fancy publications in sandals. And then his movies reflect just like this anti-establishment attitude. You are looking at Gone Girl, which is looking at the establishment of marriage. You have, Zodiac and the girl with the dragon tattoo looking at law and crime and our justice system. And it's not to say that he really veers one way or another of these like, yes, this is bad. Like, it's not like Gone Girl is saying, oh, marriage is bad, but it's looking at all the performance of it, the capitalism of it, all of the, it's looking at as an institution, as an establishment. And so I think he's doing that again, like in The Killer, he's looking at, he's looking at an assassin, which is a very real portrayal of what an assassin in today's day and age would look like with all the technology. But he's comparing that to craft and artistry and how valuable is that stuff? Can you be a crappy person and a good artist? Right. And that makes up for it. Like, he's just really, really examining the same themes he has been examining, I think, his entire career.
Yeah, I like how you're reframing it as he's turning these kind of ideas and aspects of human nature and turning them into an institution that he's then kind of really diving into, especially when you think about profession. You recommended The Professional earlier.
Yeah.
If you take it, it's artist, but you could apply the same thing. Is you being exceptional at your job make you an exceptional person?
Well, there's like this interesting line drawn between The Killer and Fincher and DoorDash, right? Like he's a gig economy worker just like anybody else. He is servicing this billionaire. At the end of the day, it is like about what this billionaire wants and what he's financing and who works for him. And like it is kind of this interesting, like it's the DoorDash that like lets him slip past building security, but there's this sort of this interesting, like he's also an employee of this billionaire and he's just has the means to come confront the billionaire and say like, do we have a problem? It's I don't know. I thought that was a moment in the film that I was like, oh, what are we? Okay, it was like kind of a cute, silly flourish that's hiding right there in that final section.
DoorDash drivers are just assassins. I mean, come on.
I mean, yeah, he's like, who needs a Trojan horse when you have Postmates?
Yeah,
and I mean, it's obviously like, I think it's very obvious that this is examining capitalism.
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah, the Amazon lockers are there too.
He's ordering all of his
Yeah.
tools off of Amazon. It enables you to be anonymous in many ways. Like he's
McDonald's sandwich.
yeah, and so much of that too is like you don't know if he's actually eating the McDonald's because he wants to, or if he's just it's part of his image. Like he's just trying to blend in as a German tourist. And like I think a lot of this movie is like, what is he really doing because he feels obligated through his job, and what is he choosing to do? Going back to that monologue that Tilda gives is like, how much of this is because you feel like you have to do it, and how much of it is because you're actively choosing to do it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's well said. Examining the idea of profession, I think is I hadn't considered the film in that light, but it's similar. Marriage, justice system, here profession, especially when you think about a lot of the themes that have been really popular in that workers' world about gig economy, burnout, fatigue, top performing, all that. Like there's a lot of things that are top of mind that he's hitting on when you look at it through that lens.
He's in an abandoned WeWork space.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, come on. Yeah.
And I love the stripped down aspect of it. You kind of mentioned it with eating McDonald's, and he flies coach. You know what I mean? Like if you look at this typical assassin movies, they're normally like amping up the you know what I mean? The kind of like the gross spending of like he's globetrotting and he's
how sexy it is to be an assassin.
People the anti-James Bond.
Anti-James Bond, yeah. He's wearing like very modest clothing.
Fucking bucket hat. So
Bucket,
funny.
yeah, exactly. It's like
Drives an electric moped. Like,
Yeah.
that's his assassin's ride.
yeah,
and
it's
he's
very.
just
It's almost like he's just weirdly making him even more relatable to the common man. Like
popping
like
his
how different are we?
His hard-boiled gas station eggs.
Yeah.
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 It's just like he's just trying to get cheap protein to stay fueled. He's just on the move.
I'm like everybody else, guys.
Yeah, that's what brings it back though. Is he an exceptional person? And the end conclusion he has is, nope, I'm just like everyone else. I just happen to be good at killing people.
Yep.
But once again, just another cog in the machine of capitalism. Hey, well, I want to hit on one more thing before we wrap up here. I promised I would keep this one shorter than our last episode, so we'll keep it brief. So I don't know, maybe, and you guys let me know. This might be another podcast. I do think Fincher has an especially complex legacy, given the types of subjects he's tackled, most specifically Fight Club. So he is, I would say, arguably one of the most influential directors among millennials and Gen X. For better or for worse, his films have ingrained themselves in our pop culture lexicon. And we've already acknowledged this a couple times. He's known for telling stories about outsiders. When you look at his full body of work, you got The Social Network, you got Zodiac, you got Se7en. But perhaps his most influential film is his cult hit turned cultural touchstone Fight Club. And that is a film that really tapped into the zeitgeist among white males. Dalton and myself already talking earlier about how we are part of that group that felt is very targeted by that film in particular. In a recent interview with The Guardian that I've already cited, Fincher disavowed the connection between his work and groups like the Proud Boys, who've used Tyler Durden's philosophy as something of a rallying cry. Fincher said, "I'm not responsible for how people interpret things," and continued with, "We didn't make it for them, but people will see what they're going to see in Norman Rockwell painting or Picasso's works." Lastly, he concluded that he thought by saying, "It's impossible for me to imagine that people don't understand that Tyler Durden is a negative influence." He says, "People who can't understand that, I don't know how to respond, and I don't know how to help them." What does this have to do with The Killer? Well, The Killer is about an outsider guy going in and killing people. And again, we talk cinematically, one of the more interesting things about the film is how he does the job. That first 20 minutes, you're just like leaning in all these little weird things he's doing to set up the shot. I'm just curious if we want to dig into this at all. Like, how does The Killer continue this examination of the outsider that Fincher has explored throughout his career? And I'd add on to that, do we think that this movie makes it clear that Michael Fassbender is not a role model?
LeBron?
Yeah, I feel like what he's essentially getting at is like, yeah, I know I've created a lot of despicable characters for you all to like relish and delight in, but he's not glorifying any of these people. I don't think in any of these movies. I think they're missing the fact that these are a social critique of these characters and the psychology of these characters and the psychology of the institutions they're part of. And I think that this more than any of them, you know what I mean, is commenting on that, you know, in a way. Because I think Martin Scorsese does the same thing. People always say like he's made a lot of gangster pictures and maybe he just loves violence, but I don't think he's ever glorified any of these characters. Like you watch Killers, we're not supposed to like Leo. We're not supposed to like, Robert De Niro's character. He is fascinated in how casually, you know, this kind of evil, sadistic, sinister agenda, you know, can just systemically be, you know, implemented, you know, by people who just turn an eye to it, you know, like, but it's definitely not, he's definitely not, you know what I mean, a part of, you know what I mean.
Wolf of Wall Street, he's definitely critiquing the
wealth
outrageous
and
wealth and greed. Even if it looks sexy sometimes, it's like, but like these guys all went to prison and they ruined lots of people's lives.
He's fascinated by people who are so like, you know, steeped in this to the point and getting away with this and able to, you know, like how does it continue to thrive and continue to be a part of our society? You know what I mean? As opposed to like saying like, oh yeah, look how cool these people are and look how they got away with it.
Similar to Fincher's work though in Fight Club, he's not saying, oh yeah, Tyler blowing up banks, that's actually a good answer to our problems. He's not saying that. He's saying, isn't that crazy that people would think that's the right.
And if you don't know the difference, if you can't see right from wrong here and who's who and what the point of this is, then that says a lot more about you than it says about David Fincher. You know.
Well, and question I have for Dalton or in Paris, like, do you think Fincher's doing a good job at drawing that distinction? Do you think it's on the audience or do you think it's on the director?
I think so. In that Guardian article you're talking about, you sent it over to me, and he ends really interestingly by sort of comparing himself to Burton, and he talks about how, you know, in Tim Burton's work, especially Edward Scissorhands, Edward is an anomaly. He's the only outsider, right? And I love that Fincher identifies that in his work, or at least the way he sees the world. He sees that everybody thinks of themselves as an outsider. Everybody feels alienated from the system in some way. And for my money, that's what I think makes Fincher much more interesting than somebody like Burton. Like Burton's never really grown up in some ways. You know, he's still the art school kid who's mad at his dad, which, hey, buddy, I get it. Tell me about it. But at the same time, like he can't see far enough out in front of his face to see that everybody feels the same way that he does. And I think that's what's so interesting about Fincher's work is that everybody in these movies, especially Gone Girl's a great example. I think Nick and Amy like hate each other, but they can't identify that they are responsible for that. Like the two of them like feeling alienated from everything and not being able to like come to, they're both just like very damaged people and are, you know, you can argue about who is more damaged in that movie, but I think that film's a great example of like two people who see themselves as outsiders, like coming into collision with one another in a really interesting way. So yeah, that's on us as a society to be media literate. That's on us as people who talk about media to encourage media literacy. That is the end goal, is to have conversations about the art that we're all consuming. So we can identify like what is an outsider, who is one, and what is the value of exploring that idea.
And who's the person? What is the person making the movie's perspective on this, and what are they trying to communicate through the film? They have their own perspective as a director, you know.
Well, and then how much do we give to them, right? And how much do we say now it's out in the world, and now we have to decide like what the impact of it is.
Absolutely. Paris, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's complicated. I don't agree with the sentiment that Fincher is to blame, but I don't agree that he's blameless. I think to that point of like Nick and Amy and Gone Girl, I think what it is they feel trapped by a system. Like they're trapped. And just like most of his characters are in some way trapped by some system, you know. Very much so. In The Killer, I think he feels trapped. Like he feels like he doesn't really have a choice. Like this is just what he has to do. And I mean, they're all different systems, but really what I think it comes back to that. And the Fight Club is talking about the system of like capitalism and toxic masculinity and like how men are trapped by these very systems that keep them from expressing their anger, from getting out those emotions, and they have to go and do something like a Fight Club because the system is not working for them. Right. And I think what it really all boils down to is, I mean, the fact of the matter is, when you make something like Fight Club, right, no matter what your intention is, if you have this mass of an audience misinterpreting your film, that is partly on you. However, we live in a society where part of the society is disgusted by billionaires and another part of the society admires them. So, there are people who love Trump. There are people who admire him, and then there are people who are disgusted and hate him. So we're all presented with this information. We're all going to do what we do with it. So I think that's an important part, is there's always going to be people who are influenced in the wrong way. But I don't think that he can just be like, oh, well, it's not my problem. Well, yeah, it is. You're the one making the movie. Right. I will say, though, look how many conversations he has caused through just Fight Club alone. We're talking about it. It's become a very common thing to talk about when we're talking about that movie. When
breaking all the rules.
Yeah, when we're talking about toxic masculinity, like whatever your thoughts are, your reaction to that movie is, it's brought that conversation. And can you think of another movie that has caused this much discussion about toxic masculinity and all of these things? I think that's valuable, because maybe we do need those movies that do cause that much of a rift so that we can talk about them. I think that's valuable.
I think you've hit on something like so Gen X about him, is that like kind of being above it all and being like, no, man, no, I'm too cool for that. It's like, no, you're not.
Right.
You made Fight Club. You made Mank. Like, you were clearly a politically interested person, and it's you have to like tip your hand a little bit at some point.
I'm not a sellout, but I'm also going to go hype up Netflix.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and as much as I totally agree, like in some ways with this comparison to Tim Burton, like, my guy, you're still comparing yourself to other directors.
Right.
Like, who's to say that Tim Burton doesn't feel the same way you do?
Sure.
You're not the one who knows how he feels, or like, that's your interpretation of the movie, but other people can watch it and feel completely different. So there's still some immaturity, I think, going on there, but that's what the point is like, we're all human. None of us are perfect,
You know what's funny in that same interview? I think it opens it towards the top. He says, I've never grown up. I'm still the 6-year-old who fell in love with movies. But I'm like, dude, yes, but also no, because you're hyper obsessive about getting the right shot and all these complicated themes that you've talked about you couldn't tackle as a 6-year-old, but there's still that like weird sense of like what's the word I'm looking for? I think he just thinks that people are going to do the right thing. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah, I get why you say that. I mean, especially, Dragon Tattoo and Gone Girl, I know are easy to look at because they're just kind of towards the end of the more recent works in the filmography, but those are both like trashy, lurid stories that are way about stuff.
Oh yeah.
In a like kind of obtuse way, but like are very much about like gender and systems, as you've said, Paris, like so many of the works are, but like those two movies especially are very much about like the relationships between men and women and how those are kind of fraught for reasons that no individual has anything to do with, but because of just the nature of human history and society, like there is baggage in those systems and those relationships.
Well, I think my biggest thing I wanted to add to what you all have put out there, I think Paris, what you said really resonated with me. It's not his fault, but that doesn't make him blameless. And I think we're in a really weird time for media. I used to think that it was 100% on people. And we won't get into the politics of all, but 2016 really eye-opening. Like, no, if you don't shout the point of the thing at some people, they really won't get it. And I don't like that that's the reality, because what it speaks to is just a lack of media literacy that is pretty prominent in our culture. And it's okay to have differences of opinions and different views, as you say, with different information, but there's certain a certain section of the population is equipped to like understand nuance and know how to like really ask the questions and talk about it like we're doing here or amongst their friends. And there's some who will just take it at face value and say, wasn't that Tyler Durden was pretty cool, right? Wasn't that wild? He rode the tricycle. You know what I mean? Like, he showed him who's boss. He blew up the banks. Like,
and when you and it's one of those things where when you know better, you do better. Sort of things. Like when you become enlightened to certain things, we all evolve. Like there's times, like we said, there's certain things we love. One of my favorite movies of all time is American Beauty, but it's very problematic in 2023. So I can say, without a doubt now that movie has a lot of sociological issues, you know what I mean? Like in terms of, where we stand today. I can't champion some of the themes in that movie anymore because they are now harmful to society. But I know that now because obviously I wasn't in that same headspace, but it's definitely, like you said, like when we become more empathetic, when you hear, it's not enough to say, well, I don't have anything to do with that. It was like, well, you have to denounce it though and say that, hey, like this is what I meant.
What movie you make next tells me a lot about how you're thinking about that movie you made 20 years ago.
Exactly. You can't just dismiss it and say like, oh, no. None of that was there. Well, someone's speaking to it. It's the same way, like you said, Trump's a perfect example where it's one of those things where it's like, well, I don't support this and that. I was like, well, you need to say that unequivocally. You can't just be like, you can't, be blasé about, an insurrection. It's like so, yeah. So.
Well, Fincher himself is in a system, and he is very much so trapped within the movie industry, and what you can't just make whatever movie you want. Even a person like Fincher, even a person like Scorsese, like the most powerful players in the game, still are trapped within a system. Right. You still have to worry about the money and all of that.
That's what, like, do we have a problem, Mr. Claiborne? That's what that all feels about, right? Like, it is very much like, yeah, I've got a boss and it sucks.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, Fincher is not just like this guy who gets to do whatever he wants. He is very much so. And like movie making, filmmaking, all of that is a capitalistic system. It is there to make money and make other people rich. And yes, there's a lot of artistic integrity there, of course, but it's just, it wouldn't exist if it wasn't making people money. Like,
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I think he's trapped himself. But back to like, you brought up like his viewpoint on humans. Like, I think he's pro-human.
I think he is too.
Yeah, I think he's very pro-human.
Big time.
Yeah, and it's all about like, we are limited as humans for our circumstances, and I see a lot of that coming through with this especially. But even back to like you said, it's easier to look at his later works because that comes through very clearly. But I would say, look, I just recently watched Alien 3, and that movie, I was thinking, okay, well, what? Someone who's done music videos and like all of that kind of stuff his whole career, and then now he decides to do a feature, like, why was it Alien 3? Well, to me it still is, it's dealing with the same themes that he has dealt with in all of his movies for the most part. This is a woman who is trapped on a like spacecraft that is a prison of all men. Like, so you're talking about the justice system, you're talking about gender, like from the very beginning, the looming question is she going to get sexually assaulted? Like,
right.
Is that going to happen? And what's going to happen if that happens? Like, and she's powerless in many ways. And I think it's examining those same things, even in a movie like Alien 3. It's developed over, but I think that's always what he's been interested in. Is just right, like dude. The average just everyday people, like even if they're extraordinary at things, they're still just humans. Right. Like and we were talking about too, like the nihilism in like Killers of the Flower Moon. Like I think that's much more anti-human. Like look at all these terrible things humans do, and it's not to say that there isn't positive messages there, but it's very much so a different approach of just like
a different thesis.
Yeah, very different thesis.
Well, whereas I think he, we again calling him the nihilist, his movies tend to be really down on a lot of things, systems in particular. But at the end of the day, when you're looking at the human characters, I really do think he believes that humans will triumph.
Yeah.
In one way or another. They might be broken,
That's where that earnestness and sincerity that we keep talking about comes from.
So how's Fight Club in, right? This was getting me gassed up while Paris was talking about Alien 3 and how this stuff is like early in the filmography. Fight Club ends with a dude blowing the side of his face out because his imaginary best friend is too toxic to be around. And who does he end up embracing at the end of the movie? The person who is also like getting their emotional catharsis by crying. By doing the quote unquote feminine thing of like having an emotional release in that way, as opposed to like having it through violent catharsis. Like it is all about like embracing the thing that was actually working, as opposed to the thing that is like speaking to what you're supposed to want.
Right.
It's all there. It's definitely throughout the filmography, and I think. Thank you, Laurent, for bringing the sincerity up again, because I do think it is, people miss it, I think, very often, and I think it only becomes obvious when you have this much work to look at. But the cynicism's there for sure.
Right. But so is the belief. So is the belief that I think like humanity will triumph no matter how beaten, battered, or broken. Yeah. At least it's a belief in that. Core, I think.
Yeah, I think nihilism unjustly gets categorized as a negative thing. Like, nihilism really is just looking at how meaningless and pointless these things are, but that doesn't have to be negative. Like, what I interpret, like, I think the killer is extremely nihilist. It's not necessarily negative, but it's saying, look how meaningless all of this is. Like, it's a guy who, he could be doing anything else during this time. Like, he does not have to be doing this. Mm-hmm. It's ultimately meaningless what he's doing. But then at the end, it's like, it's okay. That is, like, isn't it kind of comforting how meaningless life is? It doesn't have to be a bad thing that life is meaningless. Yeah. It kind of takes the pressure off of us as humans.
He just wants to sip lattes on the beach with his partner and feel safe.
Yeah.
That's what he wants.
I think that it's like, it's really nihilist, but it's kind of a positive look at nihilism. Mm-hmm. Like, it doesn't have to be this depressing thing like, like being a human or life or what we do is meaningless, which can be negative if you look at it that way, or you can be like, that's actually kind of nice because I don't have to stress about it as much.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
everything's not so important.
We certainly in this hyper-capitalist society love to stress out about literally everything. So, there's something to be said about that.
Paris, I'm getting a t-shirt. It's going to say pro-nihilism now.
Well, with that said, ladies and gentlemen, I think we are about out of time. Hey, we had an amazing panel today. I'm going to go around the table and let everyone share where they can follow their work at. Dalton Stuart, we'll start with you.
Yeah, you can find me every single week over on the Good Trash Genre Cast, talking about the films you would never discuss in a film studies course, but we try to do it in a film studies type way. New episodes come out on Fridays, generally speaking. You can find me all over the internet at Dollywood Squares, except on Letterboxd, where I'm Dollywood Squares. There's no A. They got character limits over there, so drop the A if you want to see what I'm watching. Coming soon, I'm going to be starting a weekly show at the Film Row Rodeo Cinema. We don't have dates locked in yet or movies locked in yet, but myself and Alex Sanchez, an actor and stand-up comedian here in town, once named Oklahoma City's funniest person once upon a time, he and I are going to be hosting a show called Down in Front, where we do a movie interruption, like a Doug Benson movie interruption or Master Pancake theater. We're going to do that kind of thing with public domain movies. Our first one, we're hoping to do it on November 30th. So again, that's the Film Row location for Rodeo Cinema here in Oklahoma City, right off of Sheridan. Come hang out with us. November 30th is again slated to be our first one. But find me probably on Insta at Dollywood Squares to get more updates on like when and where and what we'll be covering and all that good stuff. But in the meantime, if you want to see me and Alex, Alex hosts the Mixed Media Public Access Open Mic, also at Film Row, the Rodeo Cinema Film Row location. And that is every Sunday. So if you have a talent, whether it's magic or juggling or music or comedy or film criticism, come hang out at Public Access. Sign up is at 6. Show starts at 6:30. We're all in bed by 9 on a school night. It's perfect. So, in the meantime, come check out Public Access. I'm usually hanging out with Alex over there on Sundays. And then again, Thursday, the 30th of November should be our first Down in Front. So lots of cool stuff going on over at Rodeo Cinema. Stay tuned, man. Thanks, Rodeo Cinema, for bringing the repertory experience to Oklahoma City, is what I'll say.
Love to heap some praise on the that specific location. It's historic on the formerly known Paramount building.
Yeah, no, I mean, for those of you who aren't local or local and don't know, it's called Film Row because that was like our film interchange area back in the day. That was where all the reels and canisters of film would go, and yeah, it was a whole booming industry in that part of Oklahoma City once upon a time.
And now Public Access.
Yeah, that's right.
Dalton Stuart, thanks so much for joining us, sir.
Thank you, Caleb.
Paris Burris, where can people follow you and all the things you're doing?
Really, the only place online that I'm active is Letterboxd. I'm not really on any other type of social media these days. But I would also say I'm a programmer for deadCenter, and not only do we have a film festival in June each year, but we are doing a bunch of programming throughout the year as part of our Continuum series. So definitely go check out our social media, sign up for our newsletter so you can keep up to date on all of the cool local free screenings that we'll be doing throughout the year and next year.
Awesome. This deadCenter on social media or deadcenterfilm.org. LaRon Chapman.
I echo all the deadCenter plugs there. Also a programmer there. For deadCenter. But if you want to follow my film critiques, you can follow me on Letterboxd as well at black_cine_man.
Awesome. And again, you can follow me on, I guess, mostly Letterboxd and Instagram, CMasters Talk. I guess I still have an X on that. Let CMasters Talk. You can follow me there. Or just head on over to thecinematropolis.com. We're cranking stuff out. Daniel Bokemper had a great piece on character analysis on Killers of the Flower Moon. Have some other exciting stuff in the pipeline coming soon, so check it out there, cinematropolis.com. Hey, LaRon, Paris, Dalton, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Caleb.
We killed it.
And thank you, listeners, for tuning in today. Join us next time when we catch up after the American Thanksgiving holiday with a bit of a feast where LaRon and I and some other special guests will discuss the plethora of movies that we watched over the holiday season.